Okay, cool. So cooperative AI. First, a little bit of audience engagement. Who has already heard of cooperative AI?
I read the paper.
Yes. Okay, you get bonus points. Okay, I will listen.
I listened to your talk 2 weeks ago.
Oh man. Okay. Well, it's really different to the time I gave it 2 weeks ago. No, there is some new stuff. I'll hopefully keep it fresh. But okay, good. I'm glad that so many of you have already heard about it. That means I guess I'm doing my job properly. And yeah, Nathaniel will be talking a little bit more about going into some kind of like concrete stuff about this in the talk following mine as well. So excited for that too. Okay, so if you've been paying attention to AI discourse, as I'm sure you all have, you'll have heard everyone breathlessly talking about the coming wave of AI agents. 2025 was meant to be the year of AI agents. It might not be the year of AI agents, but like they're coming pretty soon. We're getting more and more agentic things. And I think it's worth just stepping back and noticing that actually in the real world at the moment, there are relatively few settings where we have sophisticated AI agents, A, more generally, but B, especially that interact with one another and that adapt to one another and these sorts of things. And I claim that this is going to change pretty soon, in part because performance and publicity is going to drive adoption. We're seeing this all over the place already. And they will be adopted by people with different interests, different actors, different organizations, different individuals, and so on. Insofar as those agents are aligned, those agents will therefore have different objectives from one another. More and more agents and more application domains and more modalities by which they can interact are going to lead to larger numbers of interactions between such agents, and agents that can act autonomously and adapt to one another are going to be more competitive than those who cannot. Okay, so what? Okay, who knows what this graph is? No one who has seen me give a similar talk before is allowed to answer. Yeah. Okay, we've got someone down there.
Flash crash?
Yes, it's the flash crash. Okay, show of hands who knows what the flash crash is. Okay, I'm seeing like a small number of hands who don't, so I'll say it very quickly. This is the 2010 flash crash. The idea of a flash crash is since, flash crashes have happened other times, they've been more or less big and more or less scary and more or less interesting. But basically in 2010, a bunch of high-frequency trading algorithms got kind of locked in this weird kind of feedback cycle where they wiped about $1 trillion off the stock market in the space of about 25 minutes before they kind of slammed the brakes on and things bounced back. And it took them ages as well to even kind of diagnose what had caused this and what had gone wrong. Okay, so that's one of my favorite examples. This is another one of my favorite examples. This is Palantir's AI war planner for defense or something like this. So if you can't see what's going on in this little screenshot, it's maybe a bit blurry. The thing on the right is a satellite image of a tank. The thing on the left is like a chat model window where you can just like ask it questions and it can give you advice about like what tactics to use in battle and all of these sorts of lovely things. And it's powered in this instance by, just like a large language model. They actually freeze it at some point, and you can see that they were using Eleuther AI's GPT-Neo, like 20 billion X or whatever it was called. Like, it's a few years old, this video now, so they just grabbed something open source and like plugged that into the back end. Don't know if anyone at Eleuther knew about that, but and I'm not saying that this is what they're using and kind of like throwing out there, and this is whatever. But this is what they use in their demo video online. So there you go. So that's all kind of doom and gloom. I'll have a few more words to say on this briefly before I continue, but I think this is only one side of cooperative AI. The other side of cooperative AI is all about the kind of positive benefits that can be achieved via improved cooperation. So this could be in like pretty parochial settings, like you could have like AI-enabled kind of like logistic networks and like all sorts of, magical, wonderful technologies that just kind of make the kind of smooth out some of these kind of like interaction problems and that humans run into all the time. On the other side of the screen, you can see a more recent example, which is from some folks at Google DeepMind. Lead author on this paper was Michiel Bakker. And what they do is they show how large language models can help humans with different preferences and different values find consensus. So they disagree with one another, and you can have this kind of language model mediator, and you can help humans kind of cooperate better than they would by themselves, which is really nice. So yeah, a big part of cooperative AI is also that side of things. For now, for this talk, I'm going to be mostly focusing on the doom and gloom. Okay, I'm going to go over this very quickly because most people have already heard of cooperative AI, so you probably don't need me to tell you what it is. But basically, it's a subfield of AI that studies cooperation problems, and these problems could involve humans, machines, organizations. By organizations, I basically just mean groups of humans and machines, so you can kind of combine these in arbitrary ways. And it has two aims, really. So the first is to reduce risks resulting from AI cooperation problems and increase gains from AI-mediated cooperation. And concretely, this revolves around understanding and controlling the degree of cooperation in the context of AI agents. So sometimes we do want agents to cooperate, that's good. And sometimes we don't want them to cooperate, and if they do so, that's bad. They might be colluding against us, for example. And more broadly, we just want to understand kind of how and when this happens. So Nathaniel's going to talk a little bit more about this in his talk, but there's this question of like, okay, so what? Like, why are cooperation problems in the context of AI like any different? So first is that cooperation can be harder because AI agents don't possess some of the features that other biological agents like humans have. We don't, at least a few years ago when I was giving this talk, it was very easy to say that like AI agents didn't have like theory of mind and these sorts of things. And now they like pretty clearly do have theory of mind. So that example doesn't really work anymore. But there are like still basic things that like AI agents are good at or bad at and that humans are good at. Similarly, in the real world, in kind of human cooperation problems, we have institutions and norms and like all of these things kind of governing the way that we are the way that we are supposed to do things, the way that we're allowed to do things, etc. And AI agents don't have any of that stuff yet. And then the other flip side to this is that cooperation can be easier because AI agents have or can be constructed to have non-biological features that allow for better cooperation. So you can do things like you can copy AI agents. You can look at their like internal like states like perfectly and determine what they're going to do. You can rerun them a bunch of times. You can kind of lobotomize them and do like all sorts of crazy things that you can't quite as easily do to a human. There's basically a lot of like affordances there that AI agents might give us when it comes to thinking about how and when they work together. So yes, challenges and opportunities, risks and benefits. You've heard it all before. Okay. Okay, this is just a very quick interlude because I think sometimes I give this talk or sometimes I talk to people and they're kind of confused about what cooperative AI is still, and so I like to give it in terms of this nice picture. So alignment is the top left thing. And this is basically about like, you have a principal, you have an agent, and you want the agent to want what the principal wants. You want the agent to be aligned to the principal. Cooperation problems are different. You're not aligning anyone with anything. You assume that a bunch of agents have a bunch of objectives and a bunch of preferences, and you want them to reach good outcomes as determined by those preferences, and indicated here by these nice, cute, happy, smiling faces. And then kind of pictorially, you can see that by kind of composing these two things, then you can end up from the situation on the left where you have maybe like misaligned, unhappy people and agents to like aligned and happy people and agents. So this is my like two-step plan for like how to achieve safe and beneficial AI. You heard it here first. Okay. And just before we continue, I want to zoom out just like a little bit more and talk about like, okay, so I've just pitched you cooperative AI and I've told you what it is. Like, why? Why cooperative AI? Why do I spend my time working on this stuff instead of all the other many important areas of AI safety? And I think these are some of the points that go least appreciated and kind of that I find myself sometimes having to spell out. So I'm going to deliver those to you. So there's a number of different reasons to work on cooperative AI. First one, maybe even most of the world's biggest challenges are cooperation problems. So like war, trade, climate change, figuring out how to defend ourselves against pandemics and asteroids and all of these sorts of things, all requires global coordination. So the claim here is that, therefore, we should differentially accelerate progress on cooperation to the extent that that's possible. And in terms of like AI risk and so on, one way I sometimes like to phrase this is like stabilizing the mid-game. We're going to get very, very kind of transformative and important powerful AI systems, and we want them to not disrupt everything and make everything go off the rails at what is potentially the most pivotal point in like the trajectory of human civilization up until this point. So if we can get AIs to help us like manage that, this seems great. Okay, point 2. Alignment is not enough for beneficial outcomes. and governance solutions will not necessarily compensate for this. So I'll make this a little bit clearer with a concrete example in a few slides' time. But the basic idea is that just because my agent is aligned with me and your agent is aligned with you, that doesn't mean we're going to get good outcomes. Like, imagine they're just kind of like naively playing the prisoner's dilemma or something like this. And it's just like, you know, we are just in a prisoner's dilemma. That's it. There's nothing else for it. And now I have my agent and you have your agent. And if they're doing what they should be doing under like reasonable decision theories, at least, maybe some people will want to argue about that, then you're going to get defection, you're going to get bad outcomes. This happens all the time. Lots of people with like reasonable objectives end up in conflict and all sorts of things. So just because you have AI agents kind of serving under you or whatever, or aligned with your preferences, doesn't mean you're going to be free from that. So implication is that AI agents need capabilities and infrastructure for cooperation. Path to impact here is mostly about avoiding conflict in the context of AI, AGI, ASI, etc. Okay, third and final one. Lots of the risks, when you ask people for their median story for how things go wrong in the context of AIX risk, it often revolves around this idea of like, and then all the agents like secretly work together and like stuff goes like really badly wrong. Not all of the stories, but lots of the stories have some element of this. And this kind of being able to kind of secretly work together or kind of like, yeah, do things together that they could not do in isolation is pretty critical to lots of these stories of doom. And therefore understanding these dynamics seems pretty important. So yeah, we need to understand and control when AI agents cooperate, and this impact here is preventing collective takeover. Okay. So this report is all about the kind of like doomy gloomy side of preventing risks. In a forthcoming report, I'm going to be talking much more about this idea of like AI for cooperation, which is like an important pillar of the overall kind of cooperative AI bet. But both of these elements are really quite fundamental to the overall picture. Okay, I'm going to pause very quickly in case anyone has questions. Whoa, we've got loads of questions. Okay, we've got a microphone running around, so I will wait for that to be delivered to you.
As per my notes, you said something along the lines of that agents don't have theory of mind for cooperation. The now late American philosopher Daniel Dennett is well known for his concept of intentionality. So could you not obtain cooperation simply by virtue of thinking of agents as having a theory of mind?
So yeah, let me just clarify what I said. So good point. Basically what I was saying before is I used to give this talk and I used to say that agents didn't really have theory of mind because they didn't. You know, you train a tabula rasa RL agent, there's no theory of mind in there really if it's just a simple basic thing. Now I think these language models absolutely do. So that I fully am in agreement with. I don't think that theory of mind is sufficient for cooperation in the sense that if I have really, really good theory of mind, like much better theory of mind than you, then maybe I can beat you at poker and maybe I can bluff and maybe I can lie and exploit and coerce you without maybe you even knowing, all because of my amazing theory of mind powers or yeah, the ability to kind of understand what you want, why you want it, what you're thinking and when and how and all of these sorts of things. So I think theory of mind is this thing that can be used as a force for good, for cooperation, and also for not. But yeah, it's a great question.
It's often in such research, people using game theory. So what do you think game theory limitations for future AI agents?
Nice. Okay, this is a great question. I'm going to partially pass the buck to Nathaniel on this because I think he's going to be talking a little bit about this on his talk. And this is a very big question, so I'll just try and give some surface level remarks. I think on the one hand, the main issue is that game theory was designed for non-artificial agents. It was designed for studying firms, it was designed for studying rational consumers, it was designed maybe for studying species and evolutionary niches and so on. And yeah, AI agents are not any of these things, and as I said, they have these kind of differences.
It doesn't work for consumers, for example, you know that. It works for firms, countries, but people are not rational.
Yeah, so that's so the flip side to the thing I was going to say is like, yes, it was developed for other things. You can then quibble about how much it works for other things. I actually think it's still pretty interesting and useful, but obviously there's an entire field of behavioral economics which is just like, humans are not homo economicus, humans are not whatever. And I think actually maybe David is going to be talking about that in his talk at some point. So Again, I'm just like passing the buck on at this point. The flip side to that, though, is that maybe AI agents and their kind of like ability to kind of ruthlessly optimize their objective and so on will actually turn into agents that are a bit more like the kind of Homo economicus paradigm that we reason about, partly because we actually build them that way, right? Like if you read the AI textbooks, it's all about like setting up this agent that has this objective, getting it to optimize it, and we speak in this language of optimization and equilibria and kind of this sort of thing all the time. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that when you kind of train this massive network via gradient descent, you're going to reach like these kind of game theoretic equilibria or whatever, but it might still be a more appropriate predictive tool in those cases. With that said, I definitely don't want to become like too bullish on this. I think it's like one useful tool of many, and I'm excited about people bringing lots of different perspectives outside of just game theory as well to the cooperative AI kind of project.
Yeah, just a comment. You mentioned prisoner dilemma. I just ran prisoner dilemma for Claude and ChatGPT last week.
Mm-hmm.
That is all discovery.
Yes.
I mean, you should not do nothing for them. They're just harmful, helpful agents which want to interact with.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I have thoughts about this and why this is not very informative necessarily, but we can get onto that later. I've got one more question and then I'll keep going.
Yeah, you've confounded coordination and cooperation problems a lot in the last few slides, and they look fundamentally different. I can resolve a cooperation problem with more communication. I make a coordination problem much more difficult to solve with more communication. What exactly are you discussing or targeting with your cooperative AI topic?
This is great. You've preempted my, the 3 slides ahead. So I'm going to talk precisely about what I characterize the difference as being between coordination or miscoordination, as well as conflict and cooperation failure, and so on. So yeah, I think that's completely right. People do use these words in different ways. I use them in specific ways, which you may or may not agree with, but I hope at the very least I will make it concrete about what I'm referring to with those words, because yes, I'm being pretty vague and pretty loose with them right now. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to keep going. Wow, yeah, it's already been 20 minutes. Okay, let's go. Right, failure modes. So, in fact, this is the very slide. So it was just one ahead. So in the report, basically, the main thing we do is we just break down ways to think about these different risks. Okay, and we do that in 2 separate ways. The first way is by thinking about the different incentives that agents have and the outcome that we want from those agents when they're interacting. So typically, we do want agents to be cooperating with one another. So cooperation is desirable. In such cases, there are 2 things that can go wrong. So if the agents all have the same objectives, it's a common interest game, everyone wants what everyone else wants, etc., then the risk is miscoordination. So this is what I'm going to call a coordination problem. Everyone wants the same thing, but they just need to work together in order to get it. Cool. So example of this, this is like a headline from a few years ago. I will say that people disagree with the SF firefighters afterwards, not least the people at the robo-taxi company, who claim that, in fact, this is not what happened and what caused the ambulance to get blocked. But nonetheless, this is like the sort of thing that I'm talking about, at least in the vague terms, which is that clearly neither of the agents wanted to block the ambulance or whatever. Everyone just wanted to get where they were going to get, but for whatever reason, they were unable to coordinate. Okay, so that's miscoordination. The more interesting and relevant and general case is, of course, mixed motive settings, where everyone doesn't have exactly the same objective. And there the risk is conflict, or more broadly, what I'm going to call cooperation failure. So yeah, a nice example of this. This is a work by some people at the University of Washington. So basically kind of like tragedy of the commons type situation, or kind of common resource problem, where they basically get a bunch of agents, they get them to kind of manage the common resources. If people exploit the resources too much, then their resources get diminished, everyone ends up worse off. So kind of classic kind of social dilemma type dynamics. And they show that kind of current LLMs are not especially good at this. More interestingly, and this is kind of related to a point that I made just before, they have some follow-up work on this, where it's a very similar one. It's a public goods game where agents can invest different amounts and get payoffs collectively depending on how much they invest. Everyone's kind of incentivized to invest the kind of minimum amount possible and hope that everyone else invests more so that you can kind of just get the profits without having to pay. And so there's a kind of classic kind of social dilemma flavor to that as well. And what's interesting about that is that in their preliminary results, at least, they show that more powerful and more recent kind of reasoning models that are more capable of this kind of complex strategic thought actually do less well in these situations, because unlike, say, Claude or ChatGPT, or GPT whatever, 4.1 or whatever it is now, they are not just kind of yes, they are RLHF'd to be nice, but they don't just kind of do the immediate, obvious, nice thing. They think kind of hard and strategically about what they should do, relative to the objectives that they've been given or whatever. And then they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this absolute game theoretically optimal, but quite non-cooperative thing. And then everyone ends up worse overall. So why am I making this point? Why am I spending time talking about this? The point is that cooperation is not something that goes away with agent capabilities. In fact, it can or with general capabilities, with general reasoning capabilities. And so the point is that you can't just scale AI, the agents more generally, and hope that cooperation problems go away, right? Another analogy to think about this is imagine you have two toddlers fighting or whatever, and you're an adult, and you can be look, no, here's the cooperative solution, you have this, you have that, done, I've solved it, fantastic. And I can do that because I'm much smarter than the toddlers. But humans end up in their own cooperation problems and conflicts all the time. And just because we're smarter in some ways and we're able to solve some kinds of cooperation problems doesn't mean we can solve all of them. So again, point being is cooperation problems do not go away just by scaling up vanilla capabilities. And also, in fact, they can get worse. Okay, final kind of logical kind of element to this kind of tripartite split is constant sum games, which is just generalization of zero-sum games. I'm not going to talk about those because by definition, no one can be better off without someone else being worse off. So there's not really, it doesn't really make sense to think about how one can increase welfare or kind of collective benefits in such a situation. So cooperation is kind of meaningless. And then finally, there's the question of what happens if we don't want the agents to work together? And that's what I'm going to call collusion. So we have some work on this. This is at NeurIPS, maybe 1 or 2 years ago now, on the ability of language model agents to steganographically collude with one another, by which I mean hide secret messages in their outputs that can be picked up by other agents but cannot easily be picked up by a monitor or by a human. We might be worried about that. There's also some other folks who've been working on that problem too. The one on the right is a toy kind of reinforcement learning problem representing a market duopoly, where these lighter shading represents super competitive pricing. So basically they put these RL agents in this market thing, they give them the ability to set prices and to trade things, etc., and they end up colluding to set prices higher than what the market equilibrium would otherwise be. So there's quite a few papers on that as well. And yeah, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about as an example. Okay, so that's the first way we break things down, by these kind of different incentives and so on. The next way we break things down is we think about the risk factors and the mechanisms that can actually lead to some of these failures. So basically, yeah, lots of different mechanisms via which these failure modes can arise. You're going to have to bear with me now, because I'm going to just give you a whole raft of examples, and then, yeah, we'll pause for a little bit of discussion after that. Okay, so the first one is just a classic game theoretic problem, which is information asymmetries. And this can lead to kind of miscoordination, and it can also lead to kind of conflict if I think, for example, you're going to kind of defend yourself against something because if I don't think you're going to defend yourself against something because maybe I think you don't care about it that much, I don't know what you actually think about, what you actually care about, then maybe I'll try and take something from you, and we'll end up in some kind of costly conflict that, had I known a priori about that, I would have preferred to avoid. Another example is network effects. So this is a paper, I think the earlier version of this at least is called prompt infection. Basically, the idea is that you can adversarially attack or prompt inject one language model agent within a broader network, and then that prompt attack can be then kind of spread and proliferated throughout the network. So the point is here that there are things that can go wrong in virtue of the fact that agents are connected in this network and are interacting with one another, that could not have gone wrong if these agents were all just independent, siloed, not interacting with one another at all. Okay. Selection pressures. This is a paper from Aaron Valinda and Ed Hughes, who's at GDM, about whether cooperation this is it's a study of kind of cultural evolution in the context of LLM agents, basically, and basically looks at whether kind of cooperative tendencies in, I think, again, a kind of public goods game. I think that's what this kind of score on the left-hand axis, the y-axis is, if I remember correctly. But basically, the idea here is that if agents are kind of more cooperative and those strategies end up being kind of like evolutionary fit compared to other strategies that others are using, then kind of the proportion of cooperative agents in the overall population can kind of decrease or increase or whatever. And the only point here is that I'm trying to make is that it really just depends. It's like not a given that cooperation is going to emerge in these sorts of settings, even if you have, like, say, GPT-4o being kind of like pretty nice in the prisoner's dilemma and these sorts of things. Okay, destabilizing dynamics, an example of that is kind of like the flash crash example that I showed before, where you have these kind of feedback loops, you have these kind of volatility, etc., that agents can enter into when they are interacting with and adapting to the actions of other agents. Commitment and trust. This is a nice paper from Dylan Hadfield-Manel's group at MIT. And basically, they look at some multi-agent reinforcement learning agents in a classic kind of social dilemma situation, and then they say, okay, what if instead we give agents some kind of like contracting devices or some ability to make commitments to one another? What's going to happen? And they investigate this setting. They show that both in theory and in practice, this can lead to kind of less exploitation, more cooperation, and kind of avoiding the kind of pitfalls kind of inherent in the social dilemma. Emergent behavior. This is like probably the most speculative one, in the sense that it's hardest to observe right now. And what I'm talking about in the context of emergent behavior is, because emergent's a kind of fuzzy word, I'm not talking about emergence in the context that people typically use it in like deep learning literature, which is just like, you know, we stacked more layers, we added more parameters, and like capabilities emerge. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm instead talking about emergence not in the context of the number of parameters or, you know, model capacity or whatever, but in terms of the number of agents. So these are capabilities or propensities that groups of agents have that no individual agent can be said to have had. So illustrated kind of evocatively, but not like necessarily very accurately, by this like kind of like flock of birds above. So it's like kind of classic emergent behaviors that are kind of studied in the context of biology and kind of complex systems and these sorts of settings. The one below that is a bit more of a kind of concrete and small-scale instantiation of this. So this is a really nice paper and a really nice example where I think lead author is Eric Jones at Berkeley, now at Anthropic, I think. And what they do is they take a weak kind of, well, they have two LLMs. Both of these LLMs have kind of safeguards, like classifiers. They're not allowed to do certain things. They're kind of been aligned or whatever. They've been RLHF'd. They have, these safeguards put around them to stop them doing bad things. And in particular, one thing they can't do is they can't write this particular cyber exploit type thing by themselves. However, if you pair them together and you give them the task, they are more than capable of breaking that task down into innocuous seeming subtasks, executing those subtasks because those subtasks slip through the safety filters, and then recombining the result in order to conduct exactly the same exploit that neither of them were able to do on their own. So the point is that just you have, yes, question, go for it.
Were these two agents quite different safeguards so that the one could do what the other was not allowed to do and vice versa, or is this the same set of safeguards for both by cooperating?
That's an excellent question. It's actually been a while since I've read this paper, so I cannot actually quite remember. The thing I do remember is that, does it even say it on this graphic? No, it doesn't say it on this graphic. Basically, they have a kind of, the setup is that they have a kind of dumb model and a smart model. And basically the dumb model is not capable of, I think the basic story that they use is that the dumb model is not capable of completing the task by itself, but it's got kind of less safeguards on it because it's just less capable. It's just like, you don't have to protect it against as many things because it just can't do that many things. Whereas the smart model is capable of kind of masterminding the whole thing, but has lots of safeguards kind of defending it and so on. So their setup has this slight asymmetry between the two agents, which I don't think is fundamental to the point, but that I think would imply that the safeguards were somewhat different. But yeah, I would have to go and look at the precise paper to give you a better answer, I'm afraid. But great question. Cool. Any other questions while we're at it? I'm going to pause for questions in a moment, but seeing as we're here anyway. Sorry, what was?
Who was the author on that last paper?
Eric Jones, Jacob Steinhardt, and Dragan. It's called Malicious Adversaries Malicious Adversaries Can Misuse Combinations of Safe Models, or something like this, I think, is the paper. It's a nice paper. Got rejected from ICML this year. Sad. I think. Okay, cool. So we're almost at the end of the list. So we've got this emergent behavior. So this is just 2 agents, right? This is like a really small scale thing. And then this big kind of network, or this big huge kind of group of kind of agents is the thing that maybe we might be more worried about kind of in the fullness of time when we have more and more of these advanced AI agents running around. Okay, and then the final case is kind of like security problems. So the basic idea here is that when you move to a multi-agent domain, there are both new attack vectors. So you can use agents, as in this case, in this kind of distributed way. Obviously, there are many, I'm not a cybersecurity person, but there are many attacks in cybersecurity or in this kind of cybersecurity space, like DDoS being a classic example, that rely on kind of distributed attacks, decentralized attacks coming from different places. So they both open up new attack vectors. They also open up new attack surfaces. So this is, again, an example of this is the prompt infection paper that I spoke about before, where the fact that these agents are now networked together and there are these communication channels that can be attacked provides more attack surfaces for people to kind of inject and kind of, exploit agents. Okay. These factors can be problematic independently of the failure mode. So I've already mentioned above that asymmetries, information asymmetries can lead to conflict, can also obviously lead to miscoordination as well. Like if you have some information, I have the rest of the information, then we need to exchange that information in order to be able to kind of coordinate effectively. I will also note that these factors are neither exhaustive nor mutually exclusive. I think that's pretty obvious. Often lots of them are going to be involved in any particular thing that goes wrong. It's going to be kind of hard to distinguish one from the other sometimes. They're also, as you can tell, something exciting going on over there. Oh, right. That's fun. Okay. So yeah, these risks, as you can tell from the examples I've been giving, they're by no means unique to AI systems at all. My point is only that they can manifest differently in their AI setting, and therefore we have to kind of study them separately and think about them. But there's lots to be learned from other domains. So yeah, lots of implications, I claim, for loads of work in AI safety, AI governance, AI ethics, if you're working in any of these areas, which I presume you all are. Okay, and then I'm going to round off with just some kind of research directions and some things that I wish more people were working on, some things that I feel excited about, etc. Before we do that, does anyone else have any more questions or points or anything like this? Yeah.
To that slide that you had before about the different expressions, the previous one.
Oh my god.
Sorry.
This one? Yeah.
So for constant sum, it seems that there could be still cooperation in the sense that maximizing value for everyone involved would be equal share. So some kind of altruism, some kind of social kind of perspective. Is that something that cooperative AI could be applied to?
I want to push back on that slightly, because in a constant sum game, regardless of whatever strategy anyone adopts or regardless of what happens, then like another agent's gain is, like one agent's gain is another agent's loss. And so at least, I mean, in fairness, you can think about better ways to do this, right? So it depends on how you want to aggregate payoffs, or what your measure of cooperation is going to be. And so a lot will hinge on that. So if you adopt a different welfare function, like if you adopt a Nash welfare function, then you might still care about this fairness thing. Or if you, adopt kind of different, standard utilitarian aggregation function, then you're going to add up everyone's utility, and it's like always going to be the same. It's always going to be the same constant. So if that's what your measure of how cooperative an outcome is, then it's not possible for whatever the agents do to reach a more cooperative outcome. Having said that, the kind of like the caveat to everything that I've just said is that even in a kind of constant sum or zero sum situation, if there's more than two agents, then it's possible, of course, for a group of agents to work together at the expense of another. So even if we are playing a 3-player game, only kind of like there's only so many points to go around. Maybe it's a fixed pie or whatever, and we're all kind of trying to get as much of this fixed pie as possible. If like 2 of us gang up on someone else, then maybe we can secure more of that pie for ourselves. And so we can still be cooperating in order to do that, but it's at a kind of commensurate expense of someone else. So there still can be cooperation in constant sum situations, but only at the level of kind of subgroups as opposed to the entire population. Yeah. Question there.
Yeah, just on the constant sum game point, obviously if there's a way to destroy value, then there is still cooperation in extracting the maximum constant pie. So it is very easy to destroy resources in our world, much harder to make them, and if our world truly is the only world there is still cooperation in making the best stewardship of it as we can. I guess this is sort of a broader question of like, a lot of these modes, which are sort of like clearly laid out on the screen, are like very entwined in real life, right? In real life, like not everyone in this room is perfectly coordinated, common interest, constantly like, playing this positive sum game, but somehow none of us have killed each other yet.
Yet.
Yeah.
It's only 4:30 in the afternoon.
But you know, like, and then very often because of the very long time horizon to reward, like it's very unclear who's causing what or like what the actual credit assignment is.
Yeah.
So I'm just sort of like from a more sort of social perspective, a little bit doubtful that like we can maybe sort of clear cut like, this is that.
Yep, I think this is completely right. So there's a couple of things just to say here. The first thing to say is like, basically nothing is a pure common interest game, and basically nothing is like a pure constant sum game. Yeah, these are the kind of extrema, the kind of logical extrema. Now, that doesn't mean that things can't be like pretty close to a coordination game. So an example of this that I sometimes like to give is like driving, basically. Like, yes, maybe I want to get where I want to go, you want to get where you want to go, and so like, you know, if I can pull some risky maneuver to overtake you and get there slightly faster, then that's better for me. But more than getting where I want to go kind of 2 minutes early, I also just want to like not crash or like not break the law. And so that there are these very like extreme, strong kind of like downsides to kind of these other actions that I might take that mean that although it's not technically a full coordination game, there's still some mixed motive situation there, it's effectively a kind of coordination game. Like, I want to drive on the left side of the road or the right side of the road, I don't really care. But like, I just want to drive on the side of the road that you are also driving on so that we don't crash. This would be bad. So that's one thing to say, is that yeah, in these two kind of extreme situations, they're kind of not that realistic, not, you know, etc. So, but they're still kind of useful sometimes to think about. But in practice, yeah, I'm going to talk about this maybe a little bit more, but I mostly just care about this one over here. I think basically the miscoordination problems just go away with scale. These are cooperation problems that do get solved just by everyone having better general capabilities, because everyone's on the same team. There's no incentives, there's no strategic incentives at all. It's just like we just get better at solving the task together, and that's it.
I would like to dispute this later.
Oh, okay, cool. We can have a fight. No, a conflict. Yes. No, that sounds good. Yeah, and some people do. Yeah, that's like, I don't know if that quite counts as a kind of controversial or spicy take, but I have had people disagree with me in the past. So there are reasons that you can disagree with that. So that's totally valid. Cool. And then the other thing you said, I don't know what the other thing you said was.
In constant sum games, you can still destroy value.
Ah, yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, I think I'm actually maybe just going to roll that point into the first thing, which is just that, like, yes, in the real world is basically just mixed motive, and sometimes we want cooperation and sometimes we don't, and part of what makes it mixed motive is the fact that we can do things like destroy value and all of that sort of stuff. So, yeah, great. Okay, I think we're actually, I'm going to move on time. People have questions at the end, they can come back to me. I know there's a question there, and apologies, but come find me afterwards and we can chat more. Okay, so I'm going to leave you then with a kind of like some research directions that I feel excited about at the moment. These are just a small sample. This is like my personal kind of taste at the moment, I guess, and what I'm currently interested in, but that's it. First, I'm just going to stand on my soapbox for a little while, because I've not been doing enough of that so far this talk, which is just to say that, like, I think these risks are underappreciated. I think that, like, in terms of the broad portfolio of, like, the people working on AI safety and so on, more people should be working on these rather than, like, more, like, I don't know, do we need more? Well, we do need more of everything, but like on the margin, I think it would be better for more people to be working on this stuff. So, yeah, I think multi-agent risks are kind of understudied at the moment. I think there's a few obvious and good reasons for this. So first is that multi-agent systems are kind of rare, and the current ones that we have are highly constrained. They look like things like autonomous robot warehouses or stuff like this, where you have these like multiple agents running around, but they're all like centrally controlled. They're all like, it's in this very structured environment. It's not really challenging or interesting from the perspective of any of the kind of realistic threat models that we really care about. Also, single agent safety like isn't solved at all, hence why we're all here. And multi-agent safety seems harder, in some ways at least. And there's also a bunch of topics that kind of look a bit like technical work and kind of look a bit like governance work. And lots of these kind of cooperation problems tend to have a little bit of this flavor, which means I think sometimes it falls through the cracks a little bit, or can fall through the cracks. So yeah, here's my cartoon of this. You have tons of people working on applications. You have some fundamental people working on fundamental capabilities, a very small number of people working on single agent safety, and you have even smaller number of people working on multi-agent safety. And so my hope with giving this talk is to like, you know, I'm a machine learning person. I like it when numbers go up. I like it when graphs go up, or unless it's a loss, that's bad. But my job is like at the foundation is getting this red bar up, basically, or like that's part of my job. So. That's true. Actually, yes, destroy value. We can just, that's the other way we can do it, I guess. We can just equalize it by, yeah, just have fewer people working on applications. That seems fine. Cool. Okay, so what should we do about this? If you've been convinced, what should you do? In the report, we highlight a bunch of research directions, like way more than I can possibly go into now, but we kind of try to lump them together into some very broad categories. So the first is thinking about evaluation. So I actually think that overall evaluations and doing evals is like overweighted in the AI safety space. I think there are too many people working on it like relative to other things. I actually think cooperative AI and multi-agent safety is a little bit of an exception to that overall take. You can disagree with that take as well, of course, but I think at the moment AI agents are all just basically evaluated and safety tested in isolation. And I think this is obviously pretty insufficient, as hopefully some of the examples I've given you has demonstrated, when it comes to the fact that these agents are not going to be deployed in isolation, at least not for long. So we need to just do more realistic and better testing of them beforehand. We also need a bunch of work working on it. We need a bunch of work making some of these risks go away. So yeah, clearly evals are not enough. We need a bunch of new methods of monitoring agents, incentivizing them, securing them, etc. And I think the final kind of bucket that we have, which is kind of like a little bit of like a catch-all one, but something we wanted to emphasize nonetheless, is that I think there's lots to be gained from collaboration with people both in AI governance. So I'm a big proponent of this kind of field of technical AI governance and agent governance and so on. I also think there's loads to be learned from people in other disciplines who've studied many of the same sorts of problems that I've just spoken about, but in non-AI settings. I think there are also things to be done involving looking at how things are done in the real world already in some of the areas that are like closest to this. So I'm working on a project at the moment where we look at like the rules and regulations and technical and non-technical mechanisms for governing high-frequency trading algorithms. So they have things like circuit breakers to stabilize things. They have restrictions on how much you can move the market so that it doesn't become too volatile. They have registration requirements. So not everyone can just deploy whatever sort of agent they want in any sort of market. So there's a bunch of just like things that people have already worked out in these other domains that we can take a bunch of inspiration from and use. So I think there's lots to be done there by working with people with those backgrounds, and that's what I'm doing on that project. So yeah. So not only are they useful for important perspectives and like useful kind of intuitions and ideas, they're also directly relevant for a lot of these key risk domains as well. So yeah, I claim that we can and should get started on all of these now. I think there's a lot of shovel-ready stuff to be done. And yeah, work in this area does require, I think, careful threat modeling. I think there's a lot of kind of like naive work that goes on in this space, but there's also lots of low-hanging fruit. So if you want to make a big difference with your work, this is what you should do. So say I. Okay, so finally I'm just going to wrap up with some like examples of areas that I feel excited about at the moment. These are not systematically chosen, they're not presented in any particular order, they're just like 3 clusters of stuff that I feel like pretty excited about right now. So I'd like more people working on them. First category, agent infrastructure. So loads of different examples of this. IDs and reputation systems. This is like feels really boring and like not that impactful, and it's not about like scheming and misalignment and all of this sort of stuff. But I actually just think in the real world, when we're thinking about kind of like stabilizing these like huge networks of AI agents and getting them to just like not have this wild west of AI agents like running around all over the place, we need stuff like IDs. We need agents to like, we need to know which agents we're interacting with, and reputation systems can provide the foundation for like lots of more kind of trustworthy and cooperative kind of interactions. So yeah, questions like how would we actually build these, and then how would we use them? There are some answers to that. Commitment devices. I think commitment devices end up resolving just like a bunch of important cooperation problems. There's a bunch of challenges there though. First, like what should the commitment devices actually look like from a theoretical perspective? Commitment sounds nice in theory, but it can also be used to make like credible threats, right? And so we might not want agents to have these commitment devices where they can just like threaten to coerce and kind of, yeah, exploit one another. Stuff to do with communication protocols. So there is now a bunch of work going into this sort of area from industry after a little while. So you have things like MCP, you have things like ATA, a bunch of these different protocols. These protocols, I think, ought to be designed, or like, I think more people ought to be thinking about the kind of cooperation and safety relevant properties of these protocols. I think you can look at the history of things like the internet and like other sorts of things like the history of programming languages, and a bunch of stuff can potentially get baked in very early on to the design of these things, which then has implications for kind of, you know, security vulnerabilities or kind of like, you know, stability things, or kind of how easy it is to patch these things and kind of adapt with them later on. So we should be wary of the sorts of things that we might be locking in pretty soon. And then, yeah, stuff on real-world applications. So I mentioned this thing about markets that I'm currently working on. I know some other people who are thinking about like how AI strategy kind of assistants like the AI planner or whatever by Palantir are being used in like military decision-making scenarios and so on, which is a canonical instance of, you know, situations where people do not all have the same objectives and you want to try and avoid conflict if possible. Okay, second big category, cooperation and learning in LLMs. Yeah, this is a broad one, extremely broad. I think the basic point I'm trying to get with here is like maybe in 2017, everyone was like, multi-agent RL, or RL agents, that's going to be how we're going to get to AGI, and that's, you know, what the future. And we developed, in cooperative AI at least, we developed all sorts of interesting ideas and clever techniques to encourage cooperation in the context of like RL environments and so on. And then LLMs came along and were like, oh, what do we do now? Because like, A, these aren't really agents, or are they agents? B, they don't seem to have like these explicit reward functions or utility functions, or like even these like easy to understand like action spaces and so on that we usually think of in these like classic kind of reinforcement learning based setups. And so everyone was like, oh, no, we're gonna have to like chuck all the stuff away. And my point is that we don't have to chuck away all the stuff away, because RL is back, and not in a great way for capabilities. But that does mean that like a bunch of the other stuff that we kind of did before or thought about is going to be applicable now, but people haven't started thinking about it really in the context of LLM agents yet. That's because, like, I don't know, training reasoning models is hard, getting RL to work on LLM is still pretty hard. So yeah, this requires lots of careful engineering, lots of careful thinking, but it's on the table now in a way that it wasn't before. So what concretely do I mean in the context of this? So first is thinking about the impacts of training on cooperative capabilities and propensities. This is what it sounds like. This is like looking at, so for example, like very basic example of this. You train some agents in a very competitive situation, you deploy them in the real world is not as competitive, but they are kind of pre-trained to be like, okay, this like my gain is, your loss is my gain, and so if I see you losing, then I'm gonna be like, good, this is good for me. So you end up taking more competitive, more aggressive actions than you would otherwise. Okay, seems bad. Yeah, also thinking more generally about kind of different training paradigms for foundation model agents. Impacts of scale and data. I'm working on some projects at the moment where it's like, cool, in the future, probably, well, we already do, we're gonna have weak agents and we're gonna have strong agents. We would like the strong agents to like not be just like completely exploit and manipulate all the weak agents. This seems nice. But like in practice, how does this work? And how do the degree of competition and cooperation between the agents how does that impact this? Is it the case that as soon as there's this like small discrepancy between like what I can get and what you can get, then I'm just going to like, strong agents can just wipe the floor with any kind of weak agent? Or is it the case that these weak agents can actually defend themselves pretty robustly in a variety of strategic situations against strong agents? Sure, they might not be able to do very well, but they might not get kind of exploited and manipulated. Open question. Information design for LLM agents. So who knows what information design is? Okay, nice. You'll all have learned something by the end of my talk then. Apart from Wojtek. Wojtek will have learned nothing. He's seen... Oh, and David. David also will have learned. Sorry, David and Wojtek. Okay, so information design is... The idea of information design is you strategically, as a system designer, as an information designer, you strategically reveal certain amounts of information to different agents in order to increase, or in order to get them to do what you want. Typically what you want is for them to reach some more cooperative kind of outcome, or for them to not be able to kind of like collude with one another, or these sorts of things. Basically what you do is you design the way that information is revealed to certain agents and what information different agents can have access to in order to come up with better outcomes. So you don't take actions in the world. You're not like a mechanism designer. You can't impose hard and fast rules and penalties and all of these sorts of things. This is the next bullet point. A mechanism design. But in information design, all you're doing is kind of controlling who has access to what kinds of information, and this can have like big effects on like the, you know, whether agents work together with one another or how they cooperate or fail to, etc. Okay, mechanism design is similar. I'm assuming most people have heard of mechanism design. I won't go into it in the same amount of detail, but basically, and then this adaptive adjective is basically like in game theory and in mechanism design and in all of these information design things, we usually think about like designing these rules by hand for like how to get agents, you know, how to, you know, make auctions more profitable or like get optimal kind of outcomes to some cooperation problem. Adaptive mechanism design says, what if we threw a bunch of machine learning at it instead? And it works quite well and it scales better. So this AI economist thing is something you might have seen from a few years ago now. This is like a cute example of this, where you have like an economist who enacts tax policies, and it's this bi-level multi-agent RL scheme, where you have like a, you know, the top level kind of economist tax policy designer, and the bottom level are these like little agents running around conducting economic business, like building things and trading things and so on. And the system designer tries to kind of encourage cooperation, or basically trade off the efficiency of the overall kind of market and the degree of equality and kind of who gets most and who gets least. Okay, final one, understanding and evaluating collective behaviors. So again, this is kind of a pretty broad one. I do think there's a bunch of work to be done on evaluations and control protocols for multi-agent systems. I don't think this is something we're seeing enough of yet. So we've done a little bit of work with the UK AI Security Institute on evals for coercion. There's some more work coming on that soon. Equally, I've worked on collusion stuff before, but I think there's just tons more to be done there. Thinking about AI control in the context of multi-agent systems as well. I think no one's doing this yet. Well, kind of, maybe Adam is doing this a bit. So yeah, we'll see. Detecting and preventing collusion. I think there's theoretical stuff to be done here about like what are the kind of hallmarks of collusion in general agents, and how do you detect it and how do you prevent it. And there's also a bunch of empirical work, like how do we stop this in practice, how will we detect it in practice, what if agents can stenographically collude, what are like strategic ways to monitor agent communications, can we do so in a way that's privacy preserving and we can deploy at scale on like vast networks of sophisticated AI agents, etc. Okay, that's my fun next point, monitoring large networks of AI agents. So yeah, lots to be borrowed from other domains here in kind of complex adaptive systems. And then finally, one thing I feel quite interested in is this question of like, so there's this threat model of like, you have a bunch of agents and they're kind of just doing their own thing. And maybe they're kind of simple, maybe they're kind of basic, and they've all got their individual objectives. And then mysterious process happens. And like the agents kind of are like, they're kind of optimizing for something together, or like something, they're working together in these weird ways. They're kind of like, there's this like kind of emergence type idea going on, or like, is there, or like, how would you know? And yeah, I've got this picture of these like bees here because there's these like, what's it called? Eusocial? Is it eusocial? Someone's nodding. Is it? Yeah, eusocial insects, where basically they kind of like, they will kind of do, their incentives are not aligned. They don't have objectives themselves in the same way that kind of individual elements of other species do. They instead work to protect the colony and the hive and these sorts of things. And this is kind of like an evolved behavior. And we might be worried about AI agents that end up doing things like this. Okay, final slide, which I think I'm about on time as well. I also work for the Cooperative AI Foundation, and if you want to work on this stuff, you should, and you should tell us, and we have money and things. So yeah, this is just my like very quick plug, and you can come and talk to me. I'm going to be floating around somewhat when I'm not working on my thesis for the rest of the event. We do a bunch of stuff. I just came from the Cooperative AI Summer School. I think even some people in this room were at there, so apologies if you've seen me give a similar talk before. But yeah, a bunch of grant making, research, education. So yeah, we do research grants. We have PhD fellowships. We have workshops and contests and hackathons and summer schools. And there's like an online Cooperative AI curriculum. And we put out technical reports and research agendas. And we also do engagement on various policy processes. And yeah, if any of that stuff sounds interesting, you should go look at our website, which is due for a refresh. And you can come talk to me as well, or email any of these lovely, shiny, happy faces. These are our trustees, staff, and advisors, respectively. You may recognize some of them. Cool, that's it. I don't know how much time we do actually have for questions, but hopefully some. Okay, we got 5-10 minutes of questions. So, yeah, let's do it.
Hey, thanks for the talk, as usual, I guess. I actually had a question mid-slide, so I don't know if you can go back a bit on the...
Which one?
Second last, third last.
This one? Or the one before?
Sorry.
Yeah. No. Well, there we go.
So, just on the information design bit, do you know if any work has been done in this space? Because the first thing that comes to my mind is like a board game situation. Like if you think of Secret Hitler, I don't know if you played it, but yeah. So you're giving information in drips to different people and see how they act towards like a certain goal, their good side and bad side. So like I don't know if any work has been done taking that kind of inspiration from.
I don't know of any work. That doesn't mean there isn't any work. I also think that there are elements of this general idea of information design that appear in all sorts of situations like this kind of game that you're talking about, which I've never played, but I'm loosely aware of. So I certainly think these dynamics have been studied a bit, but maybe not kind of systematically, or maybe not with a view to kind of like solving the sorts of kind of like maybe large-scale kind of cooperation failures or kind of risks of collusion and so on that we might be kind of looking to prevent. So I still think it's like quite early days for that sort of thing specifically. It's a great question though. Cool. Can we have this person in the middle, because they had their hand up before and I rudely didn't answer their question.
Hello, thanks for the talk, by the way. My question is like, let's say we understood how we can prevent like miscoordination, conflict, and like we have like good experimental background for the cooperative AI. What do you think, to what extent we can implement that setup in a real world scenario in terms of like political landscape of the world, and like what's your take on it?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think that the boring and kind of cop-out answer is it depends. I think there are some interventions that are made at the level of agents, individual agents, like the developers of AI agents and so on. So a bunch of this stuff to do with like the evals of like individual models and these sorts of things, or the ways in which individual models are trained, like before being deployed, and like the tools and things that they have access to. We might be able to imbue agents with certain kinds of capabilities which differentially accelerate their ability to cooperate well with others, even kind of like regardless of what we do to those others. And so those are interventions that can be made at the level of individual agents. There are also lots of different interventions that are made much more at the kind of like societal level or the kind of like infrastructure level. And so maybe we need buy-in from lots of different actors to be able to put in place some of this infrastructure, some of these monitoring schemes, all of, maybe some kind of agent governance type ideas where we have certain like rules via which we get agents to interact via and these sorts of things. Or we have methods of detecting when they're kind of like colluding, or how individual agents within large networks end up kind of amassing resources and how the dynamics of that changes. There's stuff to do with like preventing volatility in like networks of like AI agents when they're kind of learning and adapting to one another, all those sorts of things. And I think for these sorts of things, you definitely need much more kind of collective buy-in. I think, it's kind of at the moment kind of hard to see who the actor is that kind of puts lots of those things in place. There are certain kind of choke points when it comes to the developers and the kind of states in which those developers are based and so on. But yeah, I think it's tricky. I mean, the other thing is like, the way we got the current internet protocols that we have right now is there was like this competition between, people in Europe and people in the US, and the US military built theirs and were like, we're using ours. And we're the US military, so that's what's going to happen, and that's what happened. So I'm not endorsing that, but I'm saying that there are these kind of like global kind of, this global balance of power does kind of impact these things in a way that it's not my personal area of expertise, but is important. Cool.
I could add more, but like,
Sounds good. I think this person behind you has a hand. Hello, again. Wow. G more over here. Sorry, that's a philosophy joke. Do you guys
what
know
are
that?
commitment devices?
Oh, commitment devices are... so a commitment device in the context of a human is something like a contract, where it's like, there's like, I am going to do something or not do something, and here is something that binds me to that course of action or like conditional course of action. And the reason it works is because it's enforced by something. There's some laws, there are some punishments if I do it wrong, whatever, and so that's what I'm doing. There are also in the context of cryptography, there are certain kind of like, you can encode the fact that like, I will do these things, or like, here is my payment, or like my details, or etc., which I'm kind of like committing to this thing. You can think about it in the context of like bids and like price matching and all of these other sorts of things as well. So any kind of like technical device that enables agents to make commitments of various kinds. I don't know how much this answers your question.
How is it different from an agent just saying, I will do this?
Because they can then just not do it.
Where does the technicality come in? I mean, the agent could do something like a contract on the Solana blockchain, or...
Yeah, you could imagine things like that. Another thing you could do is imagine something like, we are going to interact in some domain. I am an agent. I'm like a big language model or whatever. I'm going to represent my commitment in some smaller sub-agent. So I'm going to write some code. That's going to be encoded. It's going to be on some like trusted hardware somewhere that's like can't be interfered with. I'm going to submit that, and then that is the code that's going to be executed. And my strategy is like neither here nor there at that point. But yeah, good question. Really good question.
Thanks, Bharat, from the Optimus Agents Research Group at Edinburgh.
Nice.
I'm wondering to what degree do you think existing formalisms of multi-agent RL, specifically like partially observable stochastic games, are applicable to what you've been describing here?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because it gets to this point that I made on this slide, which is just like, oh, RL was kind of out the window, and now maybe it's back in the game. I think at a broad level, RL is still an incredibly general and therefore powerful paradigm. Like, you can kind of write down anything as like RL. I think when it comes to specific formalisms, like partially observable stochastic games and stuff like this, you can write it down in the form of a partially observable stochastic game, but it's not super clear how much it's easier to think about that when applied to specific domains. When you have these very, very large open-ended domains, then the space of like potential missing information and kind of observation spaces are kind of vast. But I think it's like still certainly possible to like write things down in that way and to think of them in that ways, and potentially fruitful as well. It's not just like, sure, I can do it. Like, I can, in theory, write down like, the position of all like the molecules in this room or something, but that doesn't give me a very good like, you know, Gears level understanding of what the room is like. But it's possible. But I think it is still useful. I think one just has to be careful about these things. One more question. Do you want to pick someone so that I don't have to? Okay. Nice. Thanks. I didn't want like the guilt.
You have a slide with a title that said something like, "What should we do?"
Yeah, I did. Do you disagree? Do you think we should do something different? Or not do anything?
As an economist, can I provoke you with an answer? Study economics?
Please.
I would contend that a lot of what presented could be subsumed by neoclassical economic theory and game theory. And I would also contend that, as within any risk management discipline, you should distinguish between detection and controls.
Yes,
And
definitely.
I think that we can get a long way as a community simply by focusing on the control part, on the detection part, and then somehow figure out how to design an optimization problem. You could claim it could be a utility function. It might probably be it's easier said than done. My contention is it is doable. My question for you is, who should do it? How should we go about doing it? Or to make it more simple, how should agents think about trolley problems?
I don't know the answer to the last question. I mean, I know what I would do, but I won't tell you.
What I'm trying to say is that utility is a specification of utility functions is at the end of the day a mathematical expression of our preferences and how we view trade-offs, opportunity costs, etc., etc.
Yeah, no, this seems right to me. I'm also like, I think I'm kind of on board with the idea that like lots of this is about kind of evaluation and understanding what's going on and being able to monitor things, and this is kind of like the evals theory of change. It's like you can't know if something's going wrong if you can't tell it's going wrong, or you can't fix something, that might be going wrong if you can't tell it's going wrong. So that I'm like broadly on board with. I think that a bunch of stuff to do with the kind of mechanism design and economic paradigms does need like scaling up slightly and being applied in certain different ways in the context of AI agents, and that AI agents do have some special features that need to be taken account of, but it doesn't mean that we can't like rely very heavily on all of that existing work within those disciplines. I think that's pretty true. And then maybe I'll just say in like the final thing in terms of like, okay, so cool, so we can, let's imagine in theory we can set these rules, we can kind of set up these things, like how should we do so, who should have a say, etc. I like democracy and these sorts of things. It's a controversial statement. I think there are lots of people now starting to get like quite on board with these ideas within like the space of pluralistic alignment, within models of kind of like the Collective Intelligence Project has been doing some really nice work on this, where they kind of like thinking about how to scalably solicit input on, the ways that AI agents act and are governed at a more kind of like societal level and stuff like this. And I think that stuff is quite vital work and is going to be like an important, not necessarily the only part of that equation, but is going to be a very important part of that equation. So I guess that's where I'll leave it. But I think it's a rich topic.